Hello and welcome. I am the Letterhack, and with me now is a very special guest, and in my book, an absolute legend in the left wing independent media space. It's John Iadarola. You know him as Dragon Daddy from TYT's The Damage Report. John, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. That's very, very kind of you. I've been wanting to come on the show for a long time. Obviously, I've been a fan of your work for a very long time.
Ah,
You've profiled pretty much everybody at this point, and it's awesome. I love the space that you've staked out and your contribution to what we're all trying to do.
wow, okay. Trying to get me choked up right off the bat. I appreciate that. Well, thank you for being here. You're in the hot seat. That's what we call it. You're going to watch me draw you live. I'm in the hot seat with you because I got to watch you watch me draw you, which is sometimes more awkward for me than the guest. But
And with me,
well,
probably more awkward than usual.
well, we'll see. But I want to get in on the drawing, and while I do, everyone knows who you are, and it's no big secret. But I always start by asking my guests for their origin stories. So, could you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into independent media, and particularly how you landed your own job or your own show at the Young Turks?
Thank you. No, that's really nice of you. Although, yeah, I never try to overestimate how much people know about me or whether they know about me at all. The internet's obviously a big place. There's a lot of people in it. But I appreciate that. Uh, how I landed this spot. I mean, it's like a total fluke. Every time that I think about this, I think about like the butterfly effect and how minor a small change would have taken to be in a totally different career field. I didn't intend in doing this. Like literally a month before I started doing this, I had no intent. I was at the University of Texas at Austin. I was working on a doctorate in political psychology. I just saw myself spending my life researching why people's value systems developed that the way they do, like why certain political issues get grouped together, that sort of stuff. And maybe writing fantasy novels on the side. That was sort of the dream. And then I had been watching the Young Turks for years at that point, or listening to it. I was listening as a podcast, like while I was an undergrad, and they started up a college like spin-off channel called TYT University, and they wanted people at schools to send in videos, and so I started doing that. Like my first video that I ever sent in was about they were trying to pass a bill to allow concealed carry of guns on college campuses in Texas. That's where I was going to grad school, and it failed, thankfully. Although they did eventually, years later, pass it. And so it was cool to like have an outlet. I'd always liked talking about politics. I loved like taking government classes and poli sci and stuff like that, talking with my friends, posting online about it. But then, having people using my videos and talking about the issues I cared about was really cool. And eventually, there was sort of like this confluence of feeling like the academic work that I was working on was a little bit too abstract, a little bit too removed from what was actually happening like day to day. And I decided to shoot my shot. I asked for an internship. I did it, a 2-week internship here in LA. And then they eventually offered me a position working initially as a producer on TYT University. And very soon after that, I took over that channel. And thankfully, they seemed to like my thoughts about politics. And so eventually that transitioned into a job doing the main show sometimes. And years later, after my time in the Arctic, I was able to be given a full-time show of my own.
So, when you started, did you know right away I can do this? I can host my own show.
I'm not sure right now that I can do that.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I think that there's definitely periods where I feel more confident about it. It's you try to learn. And one thing that I will say for myself is when I watch older videos that I put out, I'm utterly appalled by it. So that's, I think, growth, I guess. Um, but it's not just that you have to grow. It's that, times change, and, what political figures are out there, what the state of American political discourse or the left specifically changes massively over time. There were periods where, back around like the murder of, Trayvon Martin or the George Floyd protests, where like those were the issues that dominated every day. And there's been periods where it was much more focused on elections, or, you try to bring the experience that you have and the research that you do and the people that you bring on and try to make a positive contribution. I'm still trying to do my original work of understanding why people have the values they do and how they can potentially be nudged in a better direction. It's just in a different format.
So you said that you go back and watch your old stuff and maybe cringe a little. This is kind of a silly framing, I'll admit right away for this next question, but Um, I used to play a lot of basketball, like street ball, and when I would try a fancy shot and screw it up, I'd look like a total fool, right? Now I play a lot of tennis, and when I screw up literally any shot, I never look any worse than a tennis pro. You just hit the
Hmm.
ball into the net. Oh well, move on with
Hmm.
confidence that you'll do better next time. When you were starting out in independent news on YouTube and whatnot, there was still a degree of figuring things out logistically, right? And like
Hmm.
technically and that sort of stuff. And the standard or point of reference, as far as I could tell, would have been the mainstream media or like cable news. Did you ever worry about looking like you were trying to be a mainstream news guy and falling short, or did you just proceed with more confidence than that?
That's an interesting question. I don't think that's a poorly worded question at all. That's
It's
interesting.
silly though, right?
Also, someday we should play tennis against each other. I think that
Oh,
would be
let's
fun.
do it.
That's one of my favorite sports.
Watch out, man. I'm a Nadal
Um,
fan, so don't get me on clay.
yeah. Um, so no, I don't think I was ever worried about looking like mainstream media and falling short. I think there have been times, especially pre-pandemic, where I don't know if it was a super conscious thing for either the main show, The Young Turks, or for myself, but I always kind of liked the idea of trying to like present visually some of the sort of tropes that you'd expect of mainstream media, um, and then use that as a way to make some people feel comfortable with getting news online that they might not otherwise at that point at least have been comfortable. You know, things change over 10 years. Um, and then with the trappings of some of that, you know, talk about politics in a different way, focus on different issues, focus on different communities. And, you know, I didn't want to scare people off initially. Now there's a lot more diversity in the media. Like back when I was starting, like I started doing videos like 11 years ago or something like that, there was way less independent media on the left or on the right. It was a very different environment. And I think there's been a lot of great experimentation that people have very different formats. I mean, you're literally drawing a picture while interviewing me. Like that's how much growth there's been. Um, but I go back and forth. Like when we went in lockdown, and I was broadcasting literally out of the one room apartment that my wife and I lived in. uh, it was a much more personal thing. There was no attempting to pretend that you were on CNN visually or whatever. Like I was literally hosting the show while controlling all the cameras, controlling the graphics and the videos that came up and everything, having to do the shots and host. It, you know, you just try to adapt to the situation. Like ideally you have tech that works, and I love that it's become so much lower barrier to entry than it used to be. Like people can literally like broadcast live right off of their phone. Like that was not how it was 10 years ago. Um, but no, I just try to reinvent myself, try to keep it fresh. That's it.
Um, so you were talking about creative writing or doing writing, fantasy writing and stuff like that. If your livelihood didn't depend on it, is there any other job, maybe like a fantasy like job that you think about or fantasize about that you would like to have? Or is this it, man? Are you going to be a, political commentator and doing the news?
I don't know. I mean, the joke that I always make is, you know, I'll do this until it doesn't need to be done. Like, you know, I think a lot of people on the left like to look ahead, fantasize to a time when we have at least a marginally progressive president, a marginally progressive Congress, a Supreme Court that isn't as, you know, viciously ahistorically opposed to the things that we're trying to achieve. And if that was the case, then there'd be a lot of stuff that I'd love to do. Like if I could write, that would be great. You know, I've always been a massive fan of fantasy and sci-fi. You know, I write a lot of different types of stuff. A lot of my work is kind of inspired by Redwall, if you're familiar with that. I would love to be able to produce for the next generation the stuff that inspired me when I was younger, particularly because I don't think it's 100% divorced from some of the political stuff that we're talking about. Like a lot of like not all fantasy and certainly not all sci-fi does this, but some of it I think gets you to be more curious about other cultures, other experiences, gets you to experience empathy and to, you know, look up to true heroism, you know, not just selfish capitalism and stuff like that. um so that would be great, but I would also like I think sometimes I do, you know, DIY stuff and, you know, that sort of thing. I do a little bit of home reno, like the ability to do something working with my hands, whether it's, like training as an electrician or a carpenter or something like that. Like that, I definitely feel a little bit of regret that you can really only focus hardcore on one thing. There are other lives that I definitely wish that I could be living, but this stuff is really important.
In terms of having heroes, is there any one person out there who can shift your way of thinking? Yeah, I always think like, oh, I've got this topic figured out. I know where I stand here.
Hmm.
And then there's somebody I trust out there. Maybe it's a media figure, maybe it's a friend or family member, and they have an alternate take. And I'm like, well, now I gotta
Hmm.
rethink it. But it doesn't often. I'm like, nope, I'm gonna stay where I am. But do you have anybody out there who can make you reconsider?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the first person that leaps to my mind is my wife, who feels
That's a
more
good
comfortable than
answer, dude.
even
Good
people
answer.
on. Yeah, exactly. Look, people online obviously feel very comfortable, talking to me about when they agree and when they disagree. I think, I try to, you know, remain approachable, and definitely people take me up on that. But my wife definitely feels more comfortable than even online people in criticizing me, and she is very interested in politics herself. She produces 4 political shows, and so she's lived a very different life than me. And so I've definitely learned from her. There's super reasonable people that I have always really looked up to in politics. Francesca Fiorentini, very reasonable, I think, and her background as an activist and everything, and the time that she spent living abroad has definitely broadened my horizons too. But also, one of the things, it sort of operates almost via osmosis, is like the audience. Like, I have the chat windows of Twitch and YouTube up, as well as the members' comments, every show that I've done for the past like 3 years or whatever, and being able to see in real time what people think. Like, we try to understand as much as we can about all the topics that we talk about, whatever we do. That said, there's a lot of topics and a lot of different sorts of lives that we talk about, and being able to see people who live that experience. Like, if we're talking about like the UPS strike or something, we have multiple people in the chat that work at UPS or did, that can talk about it, and that's always really helpful. And making sure that we remain inclusive, and having people call us like for either microaggressions or outdated language or anything or like that, like, I think is really helpful. Like, it would be super easy to get really detached if you did not know or care what people think about what you're saying, what you're covering, what you're not covering. And thankfully, we have such a direct relationship with the audience that it's almost impossible to not be aware of that stuff.
So this is interesting because normally I ask my guest, do you have evidence of moving people left? Or sometimes I ask, is your intent to change minds, or are you just putting the story out there and letting people do what they want with it? But this sounds like you're willing to let people affect your mind, right? Like from the
Mhm.
audience. Like, so the people you're reporting to the news to, this isn't like a one-way thing.
Yeah, I mean, I also want to change minds. I would ideally would like it to be a two-way thing. um, but yeah, no, I am not really interested in, like, I would never want to be just like a straight news broadcaster that just like, I care too much like about what I'm talking about. Like, I so in like 5 weeks I'm going on paternity leave, and I'm going to be out for like 3 months or whatever. I don't know how I'm going to not talk about what's going on for 3 months in politics.
Oh, I lost your volume for a sec. Somehow you got muted. We don't want you to be muted. Let me see. Oh, it says your mic isn't connected.
Oh, I was literally muted in
There
there.
you go. Okay.
Okay. So 11 years of doing this does not stop me from making really obvious juvenile issues with tech. But anyway, yeah, no, I, I generally hope that some of the things that I care about, that I want to talk about more than perhaps other shows, I know full well that some of this stuff is not what a lot of people really care to focus on. They might care about it or whatever, but it's not something that a lot of people go out of their way to look for. So, for example, I care deeply about climate change, and I'm continually frustrated with the almost complete lack of government action doing anything about it. It's why I went to the North Pole, why I made the climate change docuseries that I did. And so I try to focus on that stuff quite a bit, not just about climate change, but the degradation of the environment generally. But I also know from years of doing this that almost nobody watches those videos. But I just hope that speaking passionately about it can get some people to move it up in their like sort of list of political priorities. So a few things like that. I also hope, you know, as I think it's often been noted, sometimes by the wrong people, that there's a big issue with straight white cis males in America. And there's a lot of argument constantly about what masculinity is and what it should be. And a lot of attempts by what I would consider right wing grifters to stake out that territory for themselves. So I try to reframe that in what I think is a more productive, beneficial form of masculinity that does not abandon everyone who doesn't share demographic characteristics with you and is passionate about solving problems that aren't just your problems. And so I hope to do a little bit of that too. I don't know on a day-to-day basis whether it gets through to anyone. I do occasionally get messages, DMs, and letters from people about the way that they've been moved. So that's always awesome.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's difficult. It's difficult. It's hard to see exactly what effect you're having.
Yeah. A lot of it is your opinion, right? And this is like, I had Jeff Waldorf on last week. And when he was here, we were talking, and during our discussion, he mentioned he prefers to focus fire on the right. Do you think combating Republican policy and right-wing rhetoric can be done on the left by, and I've heard you use this term, by flooding the zone, meaning amplifying isolated issues for extended periods of time? And could we do that? And what issues do you think we could actually unify around? You know, I always think of healthcare, trans rights, minimum wage. There's so many, and there's so many important ones. Do you think the left is capable of flooding the zone, and which issues could we actually come together on?
That's a good question. I used that term? Because my predisposition would be to say that the left is really generally bad at doing that. Not just the left. I would say
You
Democrats in
said
general are bad at doing that.
you said the right was good at it,
Oh,
and
yes,
they do
they
it
are.
in a bad faith, nefarious way.
Yeah,
That's where I heard you say it.
then you're 100% right. I definitely believe that.
Could we do it for good?
Yeah, so I think there are like it might be easy for some people who haven't been following politics for long to see like right-wing media and either like centrist democratic media and like think that it's like equal in some ways, or even like if you're talking about independent media, to see like independent right-wing media like your Matt Walsh's, your Ben Shapiro's or whatever, and then like independent like left-wing media, and to think, oh, it's kind of similar. It's people staring at a camera, putting up videos or whatever, or clickbaity titles or whatever. But the issue is that there's some like massive asymmetries that are baked into this, not just in like the supply side, the fact that the independent right-wing media gets massive institutional support by the non-independent right-wing media. Every one of those people gets brought onto Newsmax and Steve Bannon and Fox News and all that. There's no equivalent to that on the left. But also, they don't need to accomplish anything on the right, because the benefactors behind them, the people that they are actually working to advance their interests, have already won economically. The goal is to just keep winning for as long as possible. And you can do that by winning elections. You can also do that by just taking up time and being an obstacle to progress and everything. But on the left, we can't do that. We can't just, this can't be fun and games because we're losing. So we have to go on the offense. We have to shift enough democratic centrists to start to elect the right sorts of people. And I think that the left has been wildly successful on that on a number of different issues. You've seen progress over the past 2 decades on a lot of these issues, while also defending against nearly nonstop bad faith attacks from the right, the flood the zone that you're talking about. So you mentioned a couple of issues there. There's obviously misinformation about climate change. There's constant demonization of unhoused individuals. But especially in the past few years, it has been relentless attacks against the LGBTQ community, trans people specifically, anything that the right thinks is associated with it. Anything having to do with education or drag queens or literally anything. And so the issue is that like we have to convince people on all of these issues while also fending off bad faith attacks from people who in some cases don't give a damn about this stuff and are perfectly willing to light entire communities on fire if that's what it takes to keep taxes low. and spreading knowing misinformation about it. It's difficult to stay on message when you're having to respond to so many things. When it's the latest climate crisis, it's the latest horrific instance of police brutality, it's the latest school shooting, it's the latest. And I get swept up in that a lot too. I don't I don't think I'm any better than anyone in staying on message, unfortunately. I wish that I was better at that.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep having that discussion and keep asking that question, if only to get people to keep thinking about it afterward. You know, because my hope is that we can come together on a lot of different things and really sway public opinion more and more. I mean, you know, we could do it successfully forever, and it would never be enough.
Well, what right now would you like us to stay for? Like if you work like if we had a thing like the right where we all just choose we're talking about sexy M&Ms today or whatever, like what would you want to focus on?
I think there's an easy one because a lot of these topics are under the umbrella of healthcare.
Hmm.
And I think that that polls really well with Republicans and Democrats. I think everybody, come on, if it wasn't coming out of your check, but instead your taxes, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
If we had anything like these um, other countries do, right? You know, eh, the excuse that we can't do it or we won't be able to get it done is BS. And I think the public would be easily convinced otherwise. Um, and so I go there, but a tougher one, and you know, keeping in mind I live in South Carolina, would be like guns and gun control and gun safety and that kind of stuff. But again, you could in a way link that to healthcare. I mean, you
Yeah.
know, a lot of this stuff is people are just living in constant fear of something going wrong physically, health wise, right? And then ending up with debt that you'll never be able to get out of.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I think healthcare might be the one. Um, I got another question for you. And then I always wrap these up by, I might have another couple questions, but I always wrap these up by recommending a comic. And I really want to get your thoughts on that. We're
Okay.
big on comic books here. Then let's talk about the Young Turks for a second, because TYT's branding has always been about speaking truth to power. That's actually where I first heard the term years ago.
Hmm.
And being free of any censorship or, you know, like corporate overlords telling everyone what to say. I want to know how that applies to the damage report. Is that like your show top to bottom,
Hmm.
where Dragon Daddy calls the shots,
Hmm.
or do you have to run material by a producer, editor? Is it a team effort? How does it work in terms of speaking your mind
Sure.
versus providing or having provided talking points to you?
Yeah. Yeah. So it all starts. We get a morning email from George Soros. I
Right. I
scan
knew
through
it. I
that,
knew it.
who definitely gives me money, and that's why I'm a millionaire.
Right.
I'm actually broadcasting this from a hut that I it's a shed.
Ah,
That's my writing office space actually, and it's baking hot in here. George
no.
Soros really needs to send more checks. But anyway, so I would say to a level that has created a great deal of controversy, including recently, philosophically at TYT, nobody tells anyone what they can or can't say,
Okay.
even when maybe you wish they did. And so I could be referencing anything. No, obviously I'm referencing, you know, the obvious disagreements that have been raised between some members of other shows on the network with things that Cenk or Anna have said on a number of issues. Um, Cenk talked about this on Friday on the show. Like he loves being disagreed with, so he would literally never tell you that you can or can't say anything.
Hmm.
Um, so no one, to my knowledge, has literally ever told me that I can't say something on the show. No Cenk or I don't know. I guess theoretically there might be people higher up or whatever on the board. I've literally never met those people or talked to those people, so I have no idea. I do coordinate with my producers. We have an awesome team. It's very easy for people to see like the damage report and they say my face in the camera and they don't realize that there's like, I don't know, 10 people that make the show happen, from producers to graphics to our booker to our editors to our publisher. Like there's a lot of people behind the scenes. And TYT, you know, even for these very technical jobs, generally people come who care about politics.
Hmm.
So, you know, obviously our producers, but like our graphics people, our editors, like care deeply about politics. A lot of them are like like awesome leftists with backgrounds in either politics or in activism and stuff like that. Basically, everybody who works there is interested in politics. So everybody pitches stories and pitches topics. Every rundown that I do is an amalgamation of things that I'm personally interested in. And my two main producers, Ashley and Mike, make suggestions. The co-hosts as well. We always try to shape the show to who our co-hosts are.
Oh, cool.
It's like tomorrow, Jessica Burbank's going to be on the show. So I'm definitely going to be looking on stuff that plays to her expertise in economics and labor and all that. And, and that's different for every host. But no, I don't think that I've ever said anything that got pushback. I've never been punished for saying anything. I might be like less inclined to, fighting or feuding than a lot of people. I think most people know that. People who are familiar with my show know that I don't generally engage in, a lot of the online fighting and stuff like that. It's just not a thing that I'm into. I don't really do debates either. Like I'm just generally, that's not what I do. I do research and I talk about stuff. But no, like being able to say that I disagree with Cenk or Anna on certain issues is not an issue. They, they're big kids. They can defend themselves and everything. So no, and it's definitely different than you might expect at like CNN or MSNBC, where there's definitely pushback. Cenk has talked about the pushback that he received when he worked at MSNBC for covering different topics. But no, I don't think I've ever experienced that.
Well, so I mean, because I just have to wonder, like, it seems like the lines are super blurred between, okay, so your job's to be opinionated and give your own perspective, right? And that's expected of you. And in an official capacity on air, that's your job. And then in an unofficial capacity, like on social media, where that's what people do, is just, be opinionated and have personal perspective. It would be like, hey, are you representing the company right now? Or is this, because it feels like you seem to do a pretty good job of avoiding that. And I wonder how you do that personally, or is it tough? Is it easy? Or is it just one of those situations where it is what it is and the lines are super blurry?
That's a great question. And by the way, we were talking before the show about how, I mentioned to Matt that my wife is, more than 8 months pregnant, and I spend most of my nights rubbing her feet. But this is a lot of fun. So let's go a little bit over. Once I started talking, I can't
It's
stop.
up to you.
But anyway, no, that's a really good question. And I'm sure that it's different for everyone. Like you got to remember, like there's TYT is the network. There's the Young Turks, which is Cenk and Anna generally. Like I lead the Friday show and I'm a guest on the Wednesday second hour. It's been different from year to year, but that's generally what it's been for a few years. You have the Damage Report. Tragically, we had the ending of the live shows today of The Watch List and Unbossed with Nina Turner. But there's also Rashad and there's the contributors, Rebel HQ and everything. Like the network has a lot of people. And then you get into all the guests that we bring on. We platform a lot of people. And generally, like you say what you say. And I can see that if someone was like spreading misinformation, I would like to imagine that there would be an issue with that. Like if you had people spreading like dangerous misinformation about vaccines or anything, I would have an issue with that. And I would think that something should be said. But disagreement, no, I think it's always been clear that I speak for myself. So I've never received pushback in that way. And there's been big disagreements. There's been big disagreements at the table, at the desk. Like I remember a big fight. I was at a panel, Cenk was there, and I think it was Michael Tracy. And there was an argument about what leads to support for Donald Trump. This was many years ago. And I'm not going to, I don't know. I can't speak for total certainty about exactly what position everyone had, but I felt like the extent to which it was purely driven by economics, I believe that's what Michael Tracy was saying, was being overplayed. And there was a big, like screaming fight like over it.
Oh, wow.
So sometimes fights happen. But I don't know. It's just some people don't like that. There's definitely people that don't want to argue or whatever, but especially Cenk, like no one's going to be surprised to find out that he loves that stuff. He can get super fired up, but he doesn't take it personally. And he also doesn't feel like anyone should tell him what he can or can't say. But no, I've never gotten in trouble. Like there was a time I remember Hassan got in trouble once or twice while he was working for us for saying something about 9/11. I don't remember the exact specifics, but it generally has not been a thing, despite having many people talking for hours every day.
Do you consider yourself a journalist? I've asked that question to a lot of people in your position. I get a variety of answers.
No, I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah,
I
that's
think that
weird. A lot of people say no.
no, I think that my
So then what's
job.
a journalist, you know?
What's a journalist? I would say that a journalist is Kenny Klippenstein. Kenny Klippenstein
Ah,
is a journalist. Ryan Grimm is a journalist. And I'm lucky to have lots of journalists come on my show. And obviously, my work relies on the work of a lot of amazing journalists. Um, I think that generally people doing original reporting with primary sources are journalists. It's kind of like the metaphor I'd make is grad students and like professors at colleges add to the the total amount of knowledge in a field. Other
mhm.
people teach it. They teach the knowledge that's there. The media might cover the knowledge that's there, including new additions, but they're the ones that are ultimately adding to it. Look, there's areas that are vague that cross over. I do interviews with authors, with activists, and lots of politicians. I've had
Yeah.
more candidates than I can say, come on, and they reveal things. And that makes news sometimes. So that's definitely a part of being a journalist, is getting information directly from these people. But generally, no, that's not how I describe it. I describe myself as a person who adds context to the news, hopefully curates a representative and entertaining sample of the news, makes it entertaining, makes it tolerable, stops people from feeling overly depressed by their news diet and feeling like apathy is preferable or feeling pushed out by things. Like, I think that's an important position, but I don't really think of it as journalism.
What does the term media activism mean to you? And do you
Mm.
practice a degree of that on your show? It's come up a lot.
I don't know how I would define media activism.
Yeah, it's not like, organizing political actions
Oh, I
or
see what you're
anything
saying.
like
Okay,
that,
I
but
thought you meant like Media Matters or something, how they
no.
hold
Mm-mm.
people in the media accountable. I mean, again, there can be crossover. Like, at TYT, we've done town halls for candidates, we've done rallies, we've done, a variety of things trying to boost particular candidates, trying to rally people around specific issues. Like all of that gets into the area of activism, but I always feel like people who that is their life's work are the ones who should be driving that. Like, if we can signal boost those people, like if we can interview, Christian Smalls or something and get more people to look into them and more people to, then that's I think a public service. But no, like, I would say best case scenario, we platform awesome activists. We try to help, but I don't consider us primarily media activists.
Do
I
you
don't
think
think.
more people should integrate that into their work? Like whether independent media or mainstream legacy media, do you think more people should? I mean, nobody votes, like the
Yeah,
majority of the people do not vote. Do you think maybe something
yeah.
around that, or I don't know? What do you think?
It's funny that that's the example that you bring up, because there have been various periods of like controversy in the news, like on what I would consider like the broader left or whatever. Several of the big periods of controversy have been specifically about questions of whether you should vote, and if so, for who. Like, I remember, like, we were attacked endlessly in 2016 for, despite the fact that we supported Bernie, and we were one of the first media outlets on the left to really raise up Bernie. Not the first, but one of the first. Um, like, I said, I don't, not everybody at the network said, but I said, obviously we cannot allow Donald Trump to get in office. It'll be an absolute disaster, and there's a lot of people whose lives literally hang in the balance. So I don't like Hillary Clinton, but we obviously have to vote for her. That
Yeah,
was considered highly controversial, and I was
yeah,
attacked for literally years over that. And a similar but smaller thing for supporting Joe Biden. Neither of those were candidates that I supported in the primary. They're not candidates that I support going forward. I have others that I'm
same.
interested in. But I think that, yes, I think for me, it's a big part of the job. I think you should integrate it into, like, if you're making videos or whatever, you're making podcasts, you should integrate it into your work if it's genuine to you. Like Dr. Rashad Ritchie, like, he covers a lot of stories, and then he wants to help. Like, he will talk about people who are suffering personal tragedies, people who've been, victimized by the police or victimized by local governments and stuff like that. And he will very often try to help out, raise money. There was a big water drive when the what do you call it? Local water system failed, I guess.
Hmm.
But that's very natural for him. He doesn't have to force himself to do it. I think that if it's natural, or just focus on the topics that are natural for you, I think that it's good. I don't think that, for me, politics should never be just a replacement for watching like reruns of The Office or something. It should be more important than that. It should be entertaining too at times, but it should not just be for fun. It's real. Like the stuff that we talk about is sometimes abstract. We talk about climate change, maybe, but it affects real people's lives.
You know what's fun for me, and this is a little weird. I get it, but like when it's election night, I have like 6 or 7 shows on my screen and then on my TV at the same time, and I'm loving it. And
Mhm.
and I have as much anxiety as anyone watching the numbers come in, right? And watching the polls close, but it is entertaining to sit there and watch all these people. And this is why I do these interviews, because after a while, like every now and then I look at the screen and I'm like, "Oh, I'm not watching the damage report. John's here. We're talking," right? Like it's a little surreal. And you feel like you get to know people and you feel like you learn everything there is to know about somebody, right? And I do these interviews because maybe that's not the case. And I don't know if we should feel like that.
Hmm.
But the fact is, you've been on my screen a lot, right? And I'll
Thank you.
watch a whole show and then I'll see clips and I'm basically rewatching the show, you know what I mean? And I do this a lot. So that's why I do these interviews. And one thing I always wonder is, because you have to cover pretty much everything, right? Like you run the gamut. Like we're talking about politics and elections and stuff like that. But I do have to wonder, is there one particular topic, and this could go either way, is there one particular topic like you would like to cover more? Like, let's say you got pigeonholed and ended up covering something exclusively from now on. Is there something like that? Is it climate change or something like that you think you could really drill down on like forever? And likewise,
Interesting.
is there a topic that you just wish you never had to report on again? I mean, I can almost guess what those would be, but
Yeah, the second one's easy. Like, I mean, we've done either for the damage report or for TYT. I've reported on almost every major mass shooting and terrorist attack that we've had, and it's always absolutely
yeah.
devastating. Like Uvalde was like we did every day for a couple of weeks, and you listen to the tapes over and over again. And it's absolutely devastating. And it's bad because of the human cost and how utterly, like, just thinking about the experience of the people in the story is bad. But then also, when you do it the first time, it's bad. When you do it the 50th time and you already know deep in the marrow in your bones that nothing is going to change, I feel like I'm in some dark purgatory. I
Hmm.
feel like I'm rolling a stone up a hill and then it falls back and crushes me, and then I need to go to the bottom of the hill and do it again, because we have an obligation to talk about these absolutely tragic things. But I
Yeah.
can't lie to the audience and say that I think that this is the time that something's going to be done. And so that's devastating.
Do you feel like, I mean, because I think about how, like, right now, everyone has to talk about the Supreme Court and they have to talk about this stuff with Clarence Thomas and getting privileges and paying for his wedding and, donors and stuff. Do you, do you feel a certain frustration with the fact that you may be wanting to talk about one thing because we're overlooking mass shootings that happen every day in favor of talking
Yeah.
about anything else that just happens to be like the flavor of the week or the hot topic? Is there a frustration for you in that? And like, how do you deal with that? Do you just get over it, or how do you
Yeah,
how do you get through
that's a
it?
good question. I mean, in this case, I like talking about the Supreme Court because it's so consequential. I mean, I hate it in another way because I know that they've locked in the ability to destroy a lot of progressive legislation for years and years and years. So that sucks. And seeing the predictions that were made in 2016 about what would happen to the Supreme Court if Donald Trump won come true is one of the predictions I've made in my life, that if I could reverse it, I would. Um, Topics that I like, there's definitely topics that I wish I could talk about more. I am deeply interested in some of the tech stuff that's happening recently, AI and that sort of thing. I already
Mhm.
talk about it a lot, and I know that I should talk about it less because I know the audience isn't as interested in it as I am. But I think that a lot of this tech and social media stuff has deep implications for our politics. I don't think that it's separate at all. I do wish that I could talk a lot more about the environment. Um, it's difficult. I have to make sure that it's approachable to people, that it's grounded in, the experience that people are having. Um, In terms of stuff that like gets talked about, like anything really where I feel like there's not necessarily much that I can add, and that, you know, like I can't even pretend to be optimistic, like I said, like, but I would, not just in the shootings, but, you know, like covering really, really bad instances of police brutality is absolutely devastating. Sometimes, honestly, covering the horrific things that the right says, like, I feel an obligation to cover it because it's so terrible, and I think that it's getting people attacked or worse. But like having to cover Jesse Waters, like like literally advocating for violence against unhoused people, like I wish that I never had to do that again.
Yeah.
Um, but you know, like Rumsfeld said, you go to war with the news you've got, not the news you want, I guess. And although there's definitely big topics every day that we don't get to, like you can't fit everything even into an hour and a half, we try to cover as much as possible.
Yeah, and often I feel like, and I talk about this a lot too, but I feel like the people who make the news become the news story a lot on the left, and there's a lot of infighting and bickering and going back and forth, and that feels like time wasted. That feels like we can there's enough variety out there that you can, you know, find people who are challenging your perspective, like I was saying, those people who help you shift your mind, and those people that you can rely on to be in good faith, and the people you can rely on to um be more boring and educational or more entertaining and volatile, you know what I mean? And so
Mhm.
I think that that's all part of what I call being on the front lines. This might be a little random, but in terms of like how you, and there is a random portion of the interview, by the way,
Okay.
but you deal with a lot of topics, especially in politics, that involve separating fact from fiction. So I wonder, like, you know, where do you land on the paranormal and aliens and stuff like that, right? Like, do you need
Hmm.
evidence for this kind of stuff, or is there some point where you're more faith-based? And what I really want to know, and I mean, yeah, I want to know if you believe in ghosts, but like more importantly, do you find that because of your job, your day job, and separating fact from fiction and questioning so much, um, that influences your day-to-day life? And like, you know, are you questioning everything you hear and looking at labels, scrutinizing nutritional labels, and people in regular conversations say, I did this one time, and you're like, oh yeah, prove it. Like, I mean, you know, does this filter into your regular life?
Yeah, definitely. And look, in some of the ways that you said, you know, we've covered things about, you know, like the food industry and how labels end up the way that they are and stuff. I've long had my frustrations with how difficult it was to get added sugars added to labels. So definitely makes you think about some things differently. I mean, obviously you can't as a regular citizen go through elections without, you know, your opinions being changed.
Right.
Ads, why certain ads are on certain networks and things like that. You think about that, you know, a lot differently, why people take the positions that they do. Look, emotionally, it definitely affects me. There are times in our politics that are great and you're like on, you know, on top of the world. There was a period where I definitely thought that Bernie was going to win in 2020. I made a video. Bernie's going to win. I felt it. But a lot of the time it is deeply distressing, like doing the research, let alone talking about it and really being raw and revealing, you know, what you truly believe and what you truly want, and opening yourself up to criticism can often feel like taking a cheese grater to your brain and your heart at the same time. Like, but thankfully I do have my wife. I rely on her to get me through that quite a bit. um yeah. So, but to the other part, the paranormal part, there was definitely a turn in that question.
Yeah,
Uh,
I know. Do you
yeah,
have evidence of paranormal or stuff
yeah.
like that?
I look, actually, just yesterday, I had a weird experience. I was in my house, and my wife had told me that she was going to take her dogs out on a walk because we have two dogs. And then I was walking through the house, and I heard her say, "Hey, babe." And I asked what, and she didn't respond. And I asked it louder, and I looked around, and she was already out. She'd already left. She was not there.
Ah,
And I do not believe that that is proof of the paranormal, but I heard it as real as anything that she's ever said to me. So that's a weird experience. That just happened yesterday.
That's a
Generally,
glitch in the matrix right there.
it was a glitch. I generally do try to rely on evidence. It comes out of, I was really big into like some forms of philosophy and logic in college, and that's always sort of stuck with me. I believe in grounding my views in evidence wherever possible. But then there's also areas where I'm willing to just accept large numbers as a stand-in for it. I do believe that there are aliens. I
Hmm.
don't necessarily believe that they've been here, but I believe that the universe is large enough that it's incomprehensible that they wouldn't exist. I love the idea that these things exist. I'm deeply interested in
Yeah.
fantasy and all of that stuff, but yeah, I generally err on the side of needing evidence.
I saw a meme today that said, if aliens ever fly by Earth, they probably lock their doors. I imagine them spraying themselves with some alien equivalent of off,
Yeah,
like to keep the humans from biting them or whatever.
yeah.
Um, so you do writing. You've written novels, right? Or at least
Mhm.
a novel, right?
I've written two novels. Yes,
And both fiction, correct?
yes.
So is that another job for you? Or is this how you
Not yet.
escape? But like, do you treat it like work, or is it a means of, I don't know if touching
Um,
grass is the right word, but getting offline?
No, I think you kind of nailed it there on the kind of a touching grass thing. For me, it's I'm uh I'm an Aquarius and I'm an INTJ, if either of those things make sense to anyone. I am generally deeply in my own head. I am a very introverted person, despite the fact that I host a talk show. I am very in my own head about ideas and needing to like figure things out and research them. And writing is, it could be a deeply introspective thing. It's a solitary thing. Also, though, during the pandemic, two of my best friends who live in different parts of the country, we created a writing group as a way to stay sane during the pandemic, and
Mm.
that's how I wrote my second novel. Was every week we would get together twice and we'd share with each other what we were writing and everything. I do, it's technically a thing that I do in the interim between amateur and professional, in that I have a Patreon where I share my original short fiction. Um, but I can't, like, I'm just too busy with everything that I do that I can't put, a fourth of the time that I wish I could put into it. I really
I'm
wish I
gonna
could.
let
I was actually writing before we started doing this, but yeah, it's still kind of a pipe dream at this point.
I moved to the South and had a lot of time, and so I started writing myself. So
Oh,
you
really?
said, yeah. Oh,
I didn't
yeah.
know that.
I
I didn't know that.
I completed a whole book last year,
Really?
and
What's it about?
it's a story told. I wish I had this fresh in my head because I figured out the perfect way, like the elevator
Okay.
pitch. It's a story told in parts, both a high school teacher's summer vacation interspliced with someone's nightmare.
That's
Yeah,
in what?
yeah.
So does it have elements of the paranormal in it?
No,
No?
but
Okay. Okay, that's
it's
interesting.
weird. It
Okay.
is weird. Yeah, it's
Interesting.
called it's called Voodoo Sleep.
I like it. That's
The
awesome.
the story of neighbors, nightmares, and mowing the lawn. Because this guy's trying to figure out the perfect method for mowing his lawn. Because he has an
Okay.
electric lawnmower with a cord, and he keeps getting in the way. You know what I mean? So he's like
That's
always in his head.
frustrating.
So an INTJ, is that what you said?
Yeah, it's a
What's
Myers-Briggs
that? Yeah,
personality type
I
thing.
always forget my code, but what is that? Because I'm a field marshal. I forget what the
A
code
field
is.
mark. I don't.
And I take it like every 7 years because I think it's like allergies where it could change. So I make
Yeah.
sure I'm still that, and I nail field marshal every time.
Okay,
It
so field marshal is apparently ENTJ, which means
okay.
that we're very similar except on extroversion versus introversion.
Oh, so
Um,
who's more extroverted?
you are apparently, according to this, more extroverted.
Yeah, I'm a
No,
I'm a ham. That makes
yeah.
sense.
Not no, first of all, not everybody accepts that the Myers-Briggs really has anything to it. I will say that
Yeah.
one of my best friends in the world, Aquilus Gordon, is a psychology professor. His work is in Myers-Briggs.
Mm,
He actually just recently started doing TikToks about it. So obviously, like for a long time, the we've joked back and forth about the career that I ended up in because he knew me years and years before I ever did anything like this. He he went on summer break and he decided, you know what, I'm going to post a video on TikTok. And so he made a video about Myers-Briggs and it got 1.5 million
oh,
views. He
wow.
went instantly viral. But
Wow.
anyway, I find it to be really fascinating. It's kind of like astrology for me, I guess.
Yeah, I
Um,
find it very interesting myself. I don't know how much faith I put into it, but I like the idea of a field marshal because that's the guy who, when everything hits the fan, you turn to me. And I
mhm.
love being that guy. It's like, no, I'll pick up the flag and lead the charge. I can do it, right? I
Nice.
love being that guy. I like being that guy for myself as a contract worker for a variety of clients rather than the, corporate world that I used to be a
Yeah.
part of. So are your stories going to be comics one day? Can these stories be adapted into comic books? Have you even thought of it? Because you should be thinking about it.
Well, that's funny. I got a message on Instagram a while back from a guy who was interested in adapting one of them into a graphic novel, and I think we fell out of contact. I like the idea of it. People have done fan art of some of the
Oh, cool.
characters. I do some sci-fi, some post-apocalyptic. The longest string of stories that I did in my second novel is it's set in a world that's sort of a cross between Lord of the Rings and Redwall. It's like a world of animals, basically, but with
Oh,
civilization and
yeah,
magic and
great.
monsters and stuff like that. And so I love the idea of that eventually being a cartoon or something. But fingers crossed. Netflix was supposed to come out with a Redwall show, and it hasn't happened yet. I was hoping
Hmm.
that would kickstart this thing.
Um, but you read comics, right?
I sometimes. So growing up, I remember when the original run of Spawn was coming out. I
Yeah.
read that and a few other little things, a few X-Men back then.
Do you still
And
have the
then
Spawn?
what's that?
Do you still have that Spawn?
I
Those
think
comics?
I think my brother might. He had like the first 45 minus 1 or 2.
Wow.
This was many years ago. But anyway, I would just read his. And then more recently, I'm a huge Marvel fan.
Hmm.
So sometimes I'll be watching like a Marvel show and that'll get me to read it. So I read part of the what the Hawkeye show is based on, and then I read a
Oh,
bunch of Miss Marvel when
oh,
that show
cool.
came out. I loved Miss Marvel. Um, but yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
super broadly read.
Okay. Well, but you've read them, so you get it.
I
Because
do.
I always end these interviews by recommending comics to my guests, and a lot of times they've never read one, and they think maybe comics are for kids. And so I get a good read on who that may be ahead of time, and I always hit them with something where they're like, "Oh my god, I didn't know John Lewis wrote comics. What are you talking about?" Right? So like, I
I didn't
always,
know that.
you didn't know that?
No.
So check this out. When he was 14 years old, he was presented with a comic about Martin Luther King
Mhm.
and Rosa Parks, and that got him into activism and civil rights.
That's
Then he,
awesome.
yeah, then he gets into Congress, and at the end of his life, he wrote a trilogy of comics, and they're not single issue; they're like books. It's called March. You
I did not
gotta
know
look
that.
this. So I'm inadvertently recommending you gotta look this up. The man's life was bookended by comic books. So if anyone thinks that it's not a
Awesome.
powerful medium, they are wrong. He started out that way. I'm not saying he was born into it, but it set him on this path, right? And
Yeah.
then he realized you can learn from comics because they're educational, and so why not educate with them, and why not
Yeah.
teach with them? If you can learn from something, you can probably teach with it too. And that's why when I would do aftercare programs for elementary and junior high schools where I would teach kids how to make comics while showing them comics that we made specifically to learn from.
Mhm.
And it was like, okay, you learn. Now let's learn how to make them so you can teach. And it was just communication. So comics are a very powerful thing. And I have two lined up for you tonight.
Okay.
And I don't know which one to go with because one is sort of real world stuff. Are you a Cormac McCarthy fan by any chance?
So I've read a bit. He's tough for me.
Yeah.
I tried to read Blood Meridian when I was writing my first novel is kind of like a Western horror, but I
What
found
about
it difficult.
What about The Last of Us or Walking Dead? You
Oh,
like those?
I love The Last of Us.
And
I'm
this
a
is like
huge
that,
Last of Us
but
fan.
no zombies.
Okay, what do you got?
Okay, it's called, well, it was originally French and it was called La Chute, which means the fall. And it
Okay.
was a Kickstarter by a Swiss comic maker named Jared Merle. I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it. And it was self-published, like I said, and then it was picked up by Image Comics and presented in the US in English for the first time ever. It is fascinating. It's an oversized full-color graphic novel collecting the first 6 issues of the series. It's not the kind of thing where it stands alone. You'll
Mhm.
probably want to keep reading, but you don't have to. You can just read
Okay.
this and be done with it if you wanted to. Um, it's got tons of supplemental behind the scenes stuff in the back, which I always appreciate. Lots of pencils and scripts and an interview with the guy, and it's only $16.99. Like, it's a pretty
I've
good
got it
price.
up.
Yeah, and so it's beautiful, right? Isn't it cool?
Yeah, that's really cool.
And I'll present it online like I always do tomorrow on Twitter, so everyone can check it out, and I'll tag creators if possible. Like I said, it was originally in French and crowdfunded. Here's the pitch for it. Readers who found themselves gripped by the apocalyptic adventures of Robert Kirkman's The Walking Dead and who were moved by the emotion in Cormac McCarthy's The Road will not want to miss The Fall. After losing his wife, one father will have to face a world in free fall, shaken to its core by the economic, social, political, and health crisis without precedent. So it's a pandemic,
Yeah,
society's collapsing, and this guy takes his family to the Andes, like to hide out. And of course, it's not that easy. It becomes a story of survival. So it's
that's
not
awesome.
it's not exactly escape, but but also I'm just gonna quickly recommend the other one. Forgive me.
Okay.
I'm just gonna quickly recommend it. It's called Once and Future by writer Kieran Gillen, artist Dan Mora, and colorist Tamara Bonvillain. It's when a group of British nationalists use an ancient artifact to bring a villain from Arthurian myth back from the dead to gain power. Ex-monster hunter Bridget McGuire escapes her retirement home and pulls her unsuspecting grandson Duncan, a museum curator, into a world of magic, mysticism to defeat a legendary threat. It's very cool. And it tells you things. He's like, "Oh, what is that sword, Excalibur?" And she's like, "No, that's how it was translated into the mainstream. It's not Excalibur." And then you realize, wow, that what we think about King Arthur is totally wrong.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's not the sword and the stone, although that's part of it, but it's
Interesting.
deeper.
Yeah. Yeah, it's got
So
like
anyway,
a Buffy feel a little bit.
yeah, kinda. And
That's cool.
again, there's 5 volumes. You could read the first one and be done with it. But if you want, you can keep going. And so,
Oh,
it's in paperback. It's real affordable. And those are the comics I recommend tonight. That's kind of a
awesome.
lot of
I
comics. I
appreciate it.
usually only recommend one. So sorry about that.
I
But
appreciate it. As part of my Patreon, actually, I break down stories of different types. I've never done a graphic novel
ah,
or a comic. I might have to look
yeah.
into one of these two to do it.
Yeah. Well, and the fall has all that supplemental stuff in the back. So that might be cool to share as well.
That's awesome.
Hey, we're linking up to your Linktree and all your stuff in the description of this video, so
Oh,
anyone
thank you.
can check out your work and find you online. Is there anything else you want to talk about or plug before we go?
Better plug. I should warn everyone. Like I said, I have not taken a lot of time off since I started doing this over the last decade. Basically, the 2 months that I was in the Arctic is like the only time that I haven't actively been working, including during the pandemic. But I'm plugging my upcoming baby, which is about to drop. So everyone should be ready for me to make that one of the only things that I talk about. I have a
Okay.
feeling. Um, Other than that, tomorrow Jessica Burbank on the Damage Report. It should be a
She's great.
good show. I'm definitely excited for that.
When she was on, she said that somebody told her she was a lot like Rorschach from The Watchmen. And I was like, that's not right. And then I was like, it kind of is, because on Twitter, the way you own chuds on Twitter, it's
Mhm.
like you're not locked up in there with them. They're locked up in there
Yeah,
with you. So anyway, we made that work. But I want
yeah.
to thank you again for being here. This was
Thank you.
awesome.
It was an honor.
Yeah, it was great. I think I rushed the drawing. I'll probably touch that up a little and put it online later for everyone to see as a finished
Awesome.
product. But thank you again for being here. I really do appreciate it. And thanks everybody else for being
Thank
here.
you.
We're going to do an after show because I've got so many new followers. I want to say hi and I want to talk to people. So see that link in the pinned chat, or that pinned link in the chat. John, thank you for being here. It
Thank
was
you.
great. Everybody, see you soon.